My stepsister didn't raise her voice. She looked straight at me, steady and composed, and said, "You've always been selfish. Pack your attitude and go." The living room went still. My mom stared at the rug beneath her feet. My stepfather shifted in his chair but said nothing. So I stood up, picked up my bag and walked out into the cold November rain without a single word. I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg. I just left. 9 days later, my phone started ringing without pause. Her voice was unsteady, almost breathless. Why had she received a vacate notice? That was when she finally understood something she never saw coming. Selfish people don't let stepsisters live rent-free forever. But before I explain how it got there, tap like and comment where you're listening from, especially if choosing yourself ever made you the villain. My name is Vivian, I'm 37 and I work as a physiotherapist. Most days my life looks composed from the outside. Quiet clinic rooms, the soft whir of equipment, patients who trust me to help them heal. People often tell me I seem grounded. What they don't see is how much of that groundedness was built by learning how to absorb pain without making a sound. My family wasn't always like this. When my biological father passed away, everything shifted gradually, the way shadows move across a room without you noticing until the light is completely gone. My mother remarried a few years later. That's how my stepfather entered our lives, and with him, his daughter, my stepsister Camille. On paper, we were a blended family. In practice, it felt more like a joint venture where the terms were never fully agreed upon. Growing up, I became the reliable one, the steady one, the one who sorted things out quietly. Not because anyone sat me down and assigned me that role, but because I never pushed back when it landed on me. I studied hard, built a career, covered my own expenses. Self-sufficiency became the air I breathed. The person who made me feel genuinely valued was my grandfather. He had a modest 2-bedroom flat in the older part of the city near the riverside, where the winters are gray and the streets smell of wet stone and bakery smoke in the mornings. Nothing extravagant, but full of warmth in a way that mattered. He used to say that a home should feel like it recognizes you when you walk through the door. When he passed, that flat came to me, not as a reward but as a trust, something he believed I would honor. At the time, Camille was going through a rough stretch. A new relationship, shaky finances, grand ambitions, and very little follow-through. My mom framed it the way she always did, gently and without edges, just temporary, just while they get settled. The flat was sitting empty anyway. Family steps up for family, doesn't it? So I said yes. In the beginning, it seemed reasonable. I wasn't depending on the rental income just yet. I was managing my own mortgage in the suburbs, tracking monthly expenses, keeping everything in order. Letting her stay rent-free felt like the right thing to do. I told myself 6 months, maybe less. But months stretched into more months. Conversations about moving timelines became purposely vague. What had once sounded like requests began sounding like assumptions. Utilities were covered, but everything else, maintenance, small repairs, the occasional unexpected cost, somehow circled back to me. Each time a flicker of resentment rose, I pressed it down. I didn't want to be the difficult one, the one who made everything about money. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly now. I gave without being asked. They received without acknowledging it. And the more comfortable it became for them, the less comfortable it felt for me. I just hadn't yet reckoned with what that silence was quietly costing. These things don't collapse all at once. They erode. Slowly, gradually, in ways that disguise themselves as ordinary conversation, until one day you realize you're already standing in the middle of something deeply wrong. It started with messages, small ones. Camille would text things like, "We might need some things taken care of this month," without specifying what. When I followed up, she'd respond hours later with what read more like a list of expectations than a request. Repairs she felt the flat needed, a piece of furniture she'd decided it deserved. I noticed she had stopped using words like maybe or if. Then the wedding talk began. At first, it was just excitement, venues she admired, color palettes she was exploring. I listened while sitting in traffic after long clinic days, the rain tapping against the car roof, the city lights blurring in the wet windscreen. Then the figures started appearing in conversation, delivered casually, as though they were routine updates rather than serious financial commitments. And every time I hesitated, my mom would smooth it over. "She's just under pressure," she'd say. "You know what weddings do to people?" I convinced myself I was reading too much into it, that no one was seriously expecting me to shoulder this until the dinner. My mom invited me over one Thursday evening. She said it would be lovely for all of us to sit together. Nothing formal, just family. When I arrived, there were extra chairs at the table and faces I didn't recognize. Camille's future in-laws. I should have left then. Instead, I smiled, took off my damp coat, and sat down. The whole evening felt choreographed. Compliments directed at me, questions about my career, deliberate attention that makes your neck tighten because you can sense what's approaching before it arrives. And then it did. Camille cleared her throat and laid out the plan. Not merely the wedding, the vision, what it should look like, what it should represent, what it deserved to be. She talked through figures without hesitation. When she finally turned to me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. I said I wanted to support her. I said I simply couldn't be responsible for the entire thing, that I had real limits. That's when the atmosphere changed. She laughed, not warmly, dismissively. Someone across the table made a remark about how straightforward things must be for someone in my position. My stepfather chimed in, bringing up all the ways family had been there for me over the years. My mother stayed quiet. That silence pressed harder than any of the words. I tried to explain myself, calmly and carefully. That's when Camille leaned back, crossed her arms, and said it. "You've always been selfish." The words landed like something had been waiting for the right moment to drop. I looked around the table. No one challenged her, no one spoke up, and in that moment I understood with absolute clarity. This wasn't about a wedding, it was about control. And I was finished pretending not to see it. I didn't sleep well that night, not out of anger, but because everything had finally arranged itself into something legible, and my mind wouldn't let it go. The smiles, the way the conversation had been guided, the silence that followed when I was made the problem. I kept hearing that word on a loop, the way it had been used not to describe me, but to disqualify me. The next morning I went through my routine mechanically. Shower, coffee, keys. Outside, the sky was flat and gray, a thin frost still clinging to the pavement. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked the same as always, but something underneath had settled into place. I wasn't wounded anymore, I was clear. For several days, nobody reached out, no apology, no message. Just the particular kind of quiet that exists when people are waiting for you to drift back on your own, when they trust that time will soften you into compliance. Instead, I started paying attention. I pulled out my notebook and mapped out what I had been covering. Payments here, upkeep costs there, small figures that had accumulated quietly over time. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't plotting anything dramatic. I was simply being honest with myself for the first time about how long this arrangement had been tilted and how ordinary that tilt had started to feel. A week later, I met with a solicitor I had known for several years through professional circles. We sat in his office on a gray Friday afternoon, rain streaking the tall window behind him, the city muted outside. I explained everything without embellishment. The flat, the absence of any formal arrangement, the dinner, the word that ended everything. He listened, then he nodded. What he told me was straightforward. I wasn't doing anything wrong by reclaiming what was legally mine. There were procedures, formal notices, defined timelines. Nothing aggressive, nothing disproportionate, just documented boundaries. I drove home and sat in the car park beneath my building for a long time before going inside. The steering wheel was cold under my hands. I thought about my grandfather, about the trust he had placed in me, about how he always believed that kindness extended to strangers shouldn't exceed the respect you hold for yourself. That evening, I didn't call anyone. I didn't compose a message. I didn't announce anything. I followed the process exactly as I had been advised, quietly and without drama. A formal vacate notice was prepared, professional, measured, no emotion attached. When I handed it in at the post office the following morning, the streets still damp from overnight rain, it felt surprisingly ordinary, like submitting a routine form, like closing a chapter that had been overdue for an ending. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew the silence was about to end. The first call came 4 days later. I was at home after a long clinic shift, shoes off at the door, the heating just beginning to take the edge off a cold evening. My phone lit up on the kitchen counter, her name on the screen. I didn't answer. It buzzed again, and again. By the time I picked up, there were 11 missed calls stacked one on top of another, as though she'd been dialing without pause, terrified that if she stopped even for a moment, everything would fall through. When I finally answered, there was no greeting. Why did I receive a vacate notice? Her voice wasn't composed anymore. No edge, no confidence. Just panic, raw and exposed. I could hear movement in the background, voices overlapping, questions being asked. Probably my mother, maybe my stepfather. Suddenly, I was no longer invisible. I leaned against the kitchen counter and let the silence hold for a moment. You can't be serious, she went on, her words tumbling over each other. This has to be some sort of mistake. Mom said you'd come around. She said you were just being emotional. Emotional. That word again. Another attempt to make me smaller. There's no mistake, I said. My voice sounded steady even to me. The arrangement was always meant to be temporary. It's over. Her breathing shifted. You didn't even give us any warning, she snapped. You just did this without telling anyone. I almost smiled. Almost. I thought about that dining table, the way they had all waited to see what I would give, the way none of them had warned me before deciding what I was expected to contribute. I didn't do it behind your back, I said. I did it without an argument. That seemed to land differently than anything louder would have. The calls didn't stop after that. Messages came in waves. Confusion turned to anger. Anger turned to negotiation. She offered revised timelines, made promises, offered explanations. At one point, my mother came on the line, her voice measured with forced calm. This is getting out of hand, she said. We're family. We can sit down and talk this through. I asked her one question. Were we family at that dinner table? She didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. 2 days later, they appeared at my door. I looked through the peephole before opening. Camille stood at the front, arms folded, jaw tight. My mother hovered behind her, eyes already glistening. My stepfather stood further back with the posture of someone who wanted to be elsewhere but didn't know how to leave. I didn't invite them in. Camille spoke first. You've embarrassed all of us, she said. Do you understand how this looks? I studied her face, the familiar one I had made excuses for more times than I could count, and saw it plainly at last. This wasn't fear of losing a home. This was fear of losing access. You told me to go, I said quietly, so I went. That's not what I meant. She was sharp now. I was upset. You were comfortable, I replied. There's a difference. My mother stepped forward. Sweetheart, she didn't mean it like that. You know how she gets. We all say things in the heat of the moment. I nodded, and we all live with what follows from what we say. My stepfather cleared his throat. Let's be practical here, he said. You don't need that flat. You're doing well for yourself. Why create all this friction? That sentence was the most revealing of all, because it finally said the quiet part out loud. I looked at him and felt something inside me settle completely. This isn't about need, I said. It's about ownership and respect. Camille scoffed. So what? You're punishing us now? I shook my head. No, I'm opting out. She stared at me the way people do when they're searching for a lever that no longer exists. Then her voice dropped, sharp and certain. You've always been selfish. There it was again, the word she'd kept ready, like a tool she trusted. I didn't flinch. Selfish people, I said slowly, don't allow stepsisters to live rent-free in their inherited flats. The words didn't come out with anger, they came out final. For a moment, no one spoke. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My stepfather looked at the floor. Camille's expression flushed, then drained, as though something fundamental had shifted. and she had only just registered it. "You can't just put us out," she said quietly. "Where are we supposed to go?" I held her gaze. "That's a question you should have been asking long before tonight." Her composure fell apart after that. She cycled through apologies, then blame, then apologies again, each one slightly different in wording but identical in purpose. None of them reached me. "You have the time outlined in the notice," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." My mother reached toward my arm. I stepped back. "This isn't cruelty," I added. "It's a boundary." They left shortly after, not dramatically, just quietly. The way people leave when they've finally understood that the situation is no longer reversible. The remaining weeks were calmer than I expected. No more calls, no more messages, just space. On the final day, I didn't go inside the flat. I parked across the street and watched from the car as they loaded boxes in the gray morning light, a thin mist hanging over the river 2 blocks away. Camille didn't look in my direction once. My mother moved slowly, as though the full weight of things had finally arrived. When they were done, Camille walked across and set the keys on my bonnet. Her hand rested there for a moment, like she was gathering herself to say something. She didn't. They drove off without looking back. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The flat was quiet after they left, not an empty quiet. The kind that settles rather than echoes. I walked through the room slowly, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. A scuffed skirting board, a stiff window latch, the ordinary wear of time and use. I arranged for what needed fixing. Fresh paint, minor repairs, nothing elaborate. Within a few weeks, the flat had new tenants. Reliable people, considerate people. The payments came in each month, on time, with no drama attached. For the first time, the flat felt like what my grandfather had intended it to be. Stable rather than strained. My family didn't reach out again. No apologies, no demands. The silence felt different now, lighter, as though I'd finally put down something I'd been carrying for years without knowing its weight. I turned my attention back to my own life. Work felt less heavy. Evenings felt longer. I started saying no without preparing a speech in my head beforehand. That shift alone changed more than I expected. I didn't lose my family that day. I lost the illusion that love requires you to quietly disappear. And that loss gave me something I hadn't held in years: peace. For a long time, I carried that word around like a bruise. Every time I replayed that dinner in my mind, I wondered if I'd been too cold, too firm, too unwilling to give one more piece of myself away. Families have a way of teaching you that love is measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice. But here's what I finally understood. The moment you stop being useful, people who run on entitlement will reach for words that sound like moral verdicts. Selfish, cold, difficult. Those words aren't assessments, they're protests. They're what comes out when access is withdrawn and a boundary replaces convenience. I didn't dismantle my family. I stepped out of a role that was quietly dismantling me. Life is quieter now, not empty, just honest. I spend my time, my energy, and my resources on things that build rather than deplete. And the peace that comes with that is worth more than any approval I spent years chasing. If any part of this feels familiar, you're not alone. Share where you're listening from and tell me what boundary changed the shape of your life. It might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want more real stories about family, quiet choices, and reclaiming yourself, make sure you subscribe.